you like to start? I can do. I didn't start it, did you?
I did.
You did, okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Adoption Happy Hour, brought to you by NAAP. We are the National Association of Adoptees and Parents, and our mission is to unify the adoption community through elevating our diverse voices by promoting dialogue, understanding, and healing through education, awareness, and connection. My name is Greg Gentry. I'm a domestic infant adoptee from the baby scoop era. It's wonderful to have everybody here tonight. We have another great presentation with a member of our community who I'm really proud to present here as a friend and somebody who's been a dialogue and conversation partner for me for about 3 years now. We'll be introducing Jill Uchiyama in just a moment here, but we do have our usual housekeeping that we'd like to get out of the way here, which is, again, that we are the NAAP, and there are some things we ask here as you are in the recorded session of the Zoom call, which is please remain on mute, raise your hand on screen or virtually to be recognized when it's time to speak for the Q&A session after the recording. You may post your comments in the chat, and in fact, we encourage that and find that that's a really nice place to get conversations going and things that are memorable for the guests to take with them. If you're experiencing a serious mental health event or suicidal thoughts, please contact a licensed professional at the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by dialing 988. And a reminder that this is a public meeting with no guarantee that information or identity is confidential. And finally, portions of this event are recorded, may be shared on our private happy hour group on Facebook and on our YouTube channel. And I'd like to see Beth or Jen if we have any other housekeeping items before we start here.
Let me get the last thing here. So fill you in on our other programs. So obviously you're at happy hour. We have 2 hosts for happy hour now. We have on the first Friday of the month, we have Greg Gentry as our host, and on the 3rd Friday, we have Patricia Knight-Meyer. So welcome to happy hour tonight. Our next program that we have coming up is First Families, facilitated by Amy Seek. That will be on February 12th. And then our next happy hour will be on the 20th. That's a Friday at 7 p.m. The next Putting Yourself Together After Reunion with Dr. Joyce McGuire Pavo. That will be on Tuesday, the 24th, and that is at 6 p.m. And then our final program is Migrating Towards Wholeness, Rewriting Adoption Narratives in the Constellation with Dr. Liz Bedetta. That is on Thursday, the 26th at 7 p.m. And like I said, Roots Tech is coming up March 5th through 7th in Salt Lake City. There is an online portion that you can register for if you'd like to attend online or in person. And then Untangling Our Roots, March 19th.
You're welcome.
21st.
That's just a mute issue.
That is it for my announcements.
Great. Thank you very much, Jen. And I'm pleased right now to make an introduction of my friend Jill. So Jill Uchiyama is a baby scoop era domestic adoptee, just as myself, born in New York City in 1968. She grew up in Northwest Indiana and attended Indiana University and Western Michigan University, where she received a master's degree in counseling. She spent 25 years in the helping professions as a counselor, teacher, and director of education in Boston. She is currently working on a book of memoirs along with a second poetry anthology. Her first book of poetry is An Intimate Life of the Adopted Person, and it's called Out of the Fog, Poems of Nature, Nurture, and Imagination, published in 2018. Jill is also a regular writer on Substack, and her Substack is called Table for One, where she writes weekly memoir pieces which include topics about adoption and altar work, which we'll be discussing here tonight. Jill is also a filmmaker of personalized legacy films since 2013. She lives in Manchester, New Hampshire, and works as a grant writer for the Manchester School District. Welcome to you, Jill, my wonderful friend. It's really great to have you here at Adoption Happy Hour.
Thank you so much, Greg.
So great to be here. This is my first time here, actually. So I'm really honored to be able to be here um,
Great.
and share some of the things that I've been talking about with my friend Greg and Andrea. Um, so I thought that what I want to talk about tonight is something that I've been really sort of falling into in the last couple of years, and I am by no means an expert on it. It's something that I've been really discovering as I go, and I hope that I can share that with you and that it would maybe inspire you as well. What we're going to talk about is altar work and ancestry veneration work. And again, I don't speak as an expert, but as someone who just wants to share what I have been discovering from this amazing practice. So, as Greg mentioned, I am a regular writer on Substack. And in fact, my Sunday Substack that's coming out is actually about this topic. This has been on my mind a lot since I've been invited to be here. So I thought what I would do is start by sharing that piece with you all. It's not a long piece, but I think it will set a context and maybe help invite you into the conversation. So the piece is called Bring Them With You. Years ago, I saw a great commencement speech given by the late Maya Angelou. In it, she advised the new college graduates to bring everyone who has ever loved you into the room. So if you were going on a job interview, for instance, and feeling intimidated, invite your dead grandpa and grandma and auntie to come with you, to enter that space with you. And when you walk into the room, people will feel something about you that they can't quite understand. You will be moved to a place of charisma, surrounded by love. Now, I've always found this advice to be extraordinary. It flies in the face of the deep severance wound that adopted people carry as we were physically, spiritually, and psychologically separated from our ancestry. And as I grew up, I began to understand that ancestry does not disappear. It is not something that can be stolen, buried, hidden, or erased. I began to see that in my white colonial culture, where ancestry is not seen as important or something to be celebrated, many people are suffering from the same kind of void. It seems that it's easier to celebrate new life rather than the wisdom gained by elders and those who are no longer with us. There were many times in my life when I needed more than therapy, more than friendship. And why wouldn't I? It's not enough to rely on a partner or a spouse to fix the hidden wounds of separated ancestry and the complex effect of living with family secrets. Or worse, the knowledge that our lives were part of a larger industry designed to make money. While other cultures, like Japan, where I first learned about ancestry veneration, center themselves around holidays, celebrating the dead, and rituals that pay respect to them, my ancestors seem to just hang in midair or in no air, nowhere. I came to understand that this bereft feeling I was having was not only because I was separated at birth, but because there was no space or place to embrace the totality of my own life's worth, the truth of my own story. To quote Mary Oliver, my place in the family of things had taken flight from the time of birth, and I had never found true ground to land upon. My inherent value was squandered by a cunning industry that fed on family secrets and actively buried the dead as well as the living. It then taught parents to continue with that toxic adoption rhetoric, and the effect was devastating for children. It has taken me many years to hear Maya Angelou's wise words, bring them with you, bring them into the room with you. But I've finally figured out a path to doing just that. I found myself walking in nature, speaking freely to my grandparents, to my fathers, to those whom I have never met, but who have made direct decisions about my life's destiny. I've begun to open the channels where there were none for most of my life. And now, with the help of my little altar, which has become a sacred place for me to join with everyone, to communicate, I've created a space for all whom I now invite into the room with me, where I once walked alone. Now, with these new conversations, the offerings that I leave for everyone who has conceived of me, raised me, taken care of me, as well as those who were kept in the dark about me. Now, I embrace and practice a relationship with them all, with great love. For this is a practice of owning my total story, the real narrative of my life. And it's empowering me to finally walk on new ground, not as someone lost to my original trauma, but as someone who can take responsibility for the consequences of that trauma from here on in, for the remainder of my life, however long that may be. Bring them with you. You're not alone. None of us are.
I think as somebody who knows you and has spoken with you about this topic, that when you said I'd like to read the Substack that I'm going to be releasing on Sunday, I don't think I realized how impactful it would be as a summary of what you've talked about, and hearing it in your own words, from the person who wrote this, and the depth of meaning that this carries for you, and the uniqueness of this, I think. And I speak also, of course, as a white adoptee who in many ways also has not had spaces like this as well, or opportunities to even to reflect on my story this way, and all the contributors to it. Because, it's something that I had thought and kind of joked about, not because I thought it was funny, but I just sometimes would tell people I feel like I came out of nowhere. And this is certainly a reminder that's not the case. And even now that there's still a streaming into from all of the surrounding people that have contributed. So, Jill, this is really wonderful. Could you talk a little bit about, you mentioned Japan, for example. I'm sure people may be intrigued by your name a little bit, and whatever you feel comfortable to share there. But how did you start to reflect on this?
Yeah, I've been sort of tracing back, for many years, how did I come upon this practice? And I do think of it as a practice. It's a ritual, it's also a practice. And I'm happy to explain what I do and what I've learned along the way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Japan, I lived there for 5 years when I was in my 20s. And it always struck me that there were these little shrines or altars in people's homes. And, that this idea of giving offerings to your ancestors was really alien to me. I mean, it was nothing I had in my own culture. And then also there's a week-long holiday in Japan called Obon. It happens every August, and the entire country takes the week off to actually do ancestry veneration, which is really about honoring deceased family members, and just making sure that they're taken care of, and that they're well thought of and remembered. So this involves festivals and offerings, and certain rituals that are done in the home. And so I just found that very interesting. I think that was sort of the beginning for me of sort of opening up this topic, and just being open to the possibility of it. And then throughout the years, I would say, just seeing certain documentaries, getting acquainted with other cultures that also do this type of work. Indigenous cultures, African cultures, Latin American cultures are all, practicing ancestry work. So I thought, well, there's something to that. And then I think just, as I was going through the last 10 years of my mother's life, my adopted mom, had a very tough time aging, and there were a lot of decisions to make on her behalf. I found myself sort of talking to, taking these long, lovely walks in nature and having these conversations with her parents in my mind, and just kind of, reaching out to them, sort of opening up this channel and reaching out and asking them for guidance on what to do, what was the best thing to do. And that was sort of the beginning of kind of that communication opening up between me and my grandparents. And then I included my father and more people as I went along. So it was sort of a natural process of starting this. And then in the last couple of years, I actually found myself buying this little makeshift shelf, which I turned into an altar, which I now have a place where I go and do this work.
I was going to ask you that, so there was a transition from something that was pretty inward or interior. The conversing with them was obviously real dialogue, but it wasn't something that had played out into a physical space necessarily for you at that point. And you really are talking about creating something tangible and a location and a place to bring things. And that must be so significant for you and probably sparked your imagination in so many ways to what to bring in, who to bring in. And we've talked about that, but what was it like to start to bring elements to the altar?
It was fascinating, actually, in my experience, because I didn't really know how to do it. I was kind of looking at, well, what do other cultures do? What are some of the other things? And I knew that, making offerings was a piece of it. So I started by, buying these little tiny vessels and filling them up with water and alcohol and kind of putting it on my shelf. And I had little photographs of people. And, there was a moment when I couldn't decide if it was supposed to be an altar for my adopted side and lineages or for my biological side. And so I decided that everyone was going to be represented on there. And that was a very important decision, because I like to joke that they all have to deal with each other on the altar, which is kind of funny. But it actually had a real effect on me, to bring them all together, because these are people who would never be brought together in real life. But what occurred to me was that I'm the intersection of all of these people. I am the person who is carrying forth the intentions of them and the lineages of them all. And that's a unique position to be in as an adoptee. And so why wouldn't they all be there? because that's the narrative shift that needed to happen for me, was that it isn't just about this side or that side, or don't talk about these people, but they're all actually embraced in this way. And that has really kind of aligned me in this interesting way with the truth of my own life. So that's been very powerful.
You added things to the altar. Did you
Yeah.
find that the comprehensive scope of your story kind of changed for you? Like you saw it more broadly?
Yes. And things just jumped out at me too. I mean, once I had this shelf, it was just like this funky little purple shelf that I bought. I mean, it isn't even, a proper altar. It's just something that I felt, I could really create something good with it. I started putting little pictures of everybody on it. And by the way, I also include my friends who've passed away, because I embrace them too as part of my family. So everybody's on this thing. There's candles. I was kind of reading about what is typical to put on an altar. A lot of times there's an idea of smoke and clearing the energy, having, incense or candles. And, like I said, making the offerings of wine or water. But then I would be in a store and all of a sudden something would sort of jump off the shelf. And I would say, oh my gosh, that's calling, to be on the altar. And it might be, some kind of piece of rock or something, or sometimes it's an actual, when my mother died, I gathered some of her hair from her brush and I wrapped it up really nicely and put it on the altar. So there's actually physical pieces of people as well. Maybe a piece of clothing. Or my brother went to my grandmother's house in Greece and for some reason felt compelled to dig up some soil from her garden and sent it to me in a baggie. I don't know why. But I bought this beautiful little box and I put the soil in this box, and that's on the altar. Um, so people have also contributed in ways that, maybe they didn't expect to as well.
Really interested in, you started out talking about, I'll summarize this as walks and talks. You were out in nature, you were kind of communing, and you started to speak with those who had passed, the decedents, and that seemed to be like a starting point that opened up a lot of things. Do you think if you had started with the physical part first, somehow you'd gotten in your mind of, I'm going to create an altar, maybe it would have been a different experience than the more transcendent depth that you probably developed through the conversational side, like that kind of preceded it in a very helpful and supportive way, and maybe made the physical presence of the space make a lot of logical sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, there, and I don't mean to get too paranormal about anything, because I don't know, I don't know what's beyond the veil. I don't know, but I have had some very interesting experiences with this practice. I think I mentioned that when I would have these conversations with my ancestors, they definitely, there was always a sense of being heard, and in some way, shape, or form, whatever challenge or difficulty I was having, there would be some kind of way forward that was opening up. And I always felt that was part of the communication with them. I think one of the most striking examples of that is last spring, when my adopted mom was passing. Well, she was really declining, and we didn't live in the same state. And I was really asking her parents for support. Could you please help her in her transition? This is happening. Opening that up with them. And about 2 weeks later, the hospice nurse called me, and she said, you know, your mother said that her father told her, get your purse, Lois, it's time to come home. And this was after I had these conversations with them. Now, of course, I don't know what that means. It just was fascinating that this was sort of happening in, you know, at around the same time. So I just I'm blown away by the possibility of these connections. And what I do know is how it's affected me, and the kind of difference that I feel as I practice this.
That must have been, I think, quite a surprise, though, to hear that message from the nurse. And you can't help but wonder about that, right? And I don't know how not to just consider possibilities of what's going on there, and whether that brought you any peace or additional reflectiveness. I'm sure it brought that for sure, but yeah, that's very amazing to hear that.
I think it brings a sense of connection where there hasn't been one. You know, when you don't practice ancestry work, and all of those wonderful people are just put in the ground or, you know, pushed away. It's like you lose access to something very important, I think.
Yeah.
And so this is, you know, there's a reason why cultures do this, and a really good reason why we should try experimenting with it as well.
Yeah, this ties into something that I wrote as you were reading your piece, which is about the hanging in midair or being nowhere. And it's like this bubble of our reality with no roots extending outward, and we just don't have any sense of it. And so just the idea of having ancestors,
Mm.
of having people who came before us, and to know that, as you said, you're in the intersection of all of these things, which is incredibly complicated. It's a big web of interconnectedness that you are trying now to replicate in or to symbolize in that physical space, and also in your dialogue with individuals and with members who have gone. But it sounds like the focal point of having some place to do this, and the practice and the ritual. I like how you used both of those words. Um, I think human beings do better when they have a focal point, right? When there's something that can unify their focus and bring it together. So yeah, I'm really intrigued by that, and the fact you also said your ancestry doesn't disappear. It's not
Right.
destroyed, because it can feel like that. It can feel like when I said, I feel like I came from nowhere. I do struggle very much with this sense of the connectedness that you said that this is providing and has helped you with in so many ways. And I can't help but think, as you and I talked, that would be a message that adoptees, for example, would be very interested in hearing about, how to be connected. it's a current experience for you, this connectedness. It's not just reading annals and looking people up who died a long time ago, but there's something
Right.
experiential about it.
There sure is. Um, and it isn't always immediate either. You know, that some of these connections take time to develop. And particularly, I think, for the ones that, like, for instance, my biological father never knew about me, and he passed away before I found him. So, you know, I'm still working with that.
Yeah.
You know, and he is on my altar. Um, and I've been offered some of his ashes, even, which I will at some point probably receive. But I want to make sure I'm ready for that. Yeah, I mean it's there's something about this work, and I mean I've was briefly working as a therapist many years ago, family therapist. I I really hope that more therapists and people who do spiritual um, guidance can incorporate some of this into the work with adopted families, because I think, and biological parents who also dealing with these same kinds of separations. There is something beyond therapy that this goes beyond, for me anyway. And I have definitely participated in plenty of therapy in my life, and nothing has touched this practice. So I there's something to it.
I can only imagine. And I do really feel like it would have to be so beneficial for a lot of people. And can't help but think there's going to be, just as when you first started talking about it to me, that people are going to be like, I've never heard of this. Heard of a lot
Mm.
of things. I've heard of modalities, and that's very therapeutic, right? To talk like that. You mentioned the spiritual dimension, for example. Um, that there's a practice and a discipline. A discipline, I don't mean, like that it has to be a certain type of repetitive thing, but there's a way you are going about doing this in a very meaningful way for you. And I'm glad you spoke here about wishing or hoping that that can be a benefit to people who are in the therapeutic space, to be able to consider offering something like that. Oh, and there's a word that I was actually going to ask you about. You've been spoken a little bit about offerings. Can you talk a little bit about what offerings are?
Well, the offerings are as a form of remembrance and a sense of giving to them, that they are, um, you know, they want to be remembered. Um, they want to be, um, you know, they are the part of you that is still, you know, alive. We stand on their shoulders, and so um, by making offerings, we're letting them know that we love them and that they're part of our existence, and that, in my mind, what I feel is I bring the best of your intentions through me, and that the pieces that have been broken or are wounded are the pieces that I give offerings and I try to heal at the same time. But it's a two-way street. I also ask for their support and their guidance and as well. So it isn't just a one-way street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you also had mentioned how you started to explore a little bit about the fact that this is kind of a global thing. We may not be used to thinking about it here in America, but you found examples of it all over the place. So this is something that people do and have done for a long time. And do you have any thoughts on why you think it was never important in our culture?
In Well, I love the work of Stephen Jenkinson, and I don't know if anyone knows who that is, but he did a wonderful a documentary called Grief Walker, and he's worked with dying people. He's got a master's from Harvard in divinity work. He's Canadian, and he is someone who has some very interesting perspectives on the white culture, white colonial culture of America, where we come from other places as, and I mean, we've had a very particular direction in where we've come from, and what we have tried to do by coming to this country and setting up a new home. But there's a sense of, homelessness in a way, I think sometimes with us, because we don't tend to honor ancestry. We don't really have anyone waiting for us to come back to the, mother country. And is this really going the way we thought it would? I don't want to get political, but to me, it seems very clear that there has been something missing from our path, deeply missing. So, yes, I will put the name of Stephen Jenkinson in the chat. And I can't wait to hear what the listeners have to say. I've seen some interesting comments about people who are doing ancestry work, and I'd love to hear what they have to say as well.
Yeah, as I read even some of the comments coming in here, I feel like, there is an important point here being made about which is there are, and you mentioned grief here. This hasn't just been a bunch of harmonious coming together, but there are real deep feelings and hurts and possibly anger and all kinds of other emotions that come together. And you have them all in one space of people who maybe were responsible for your relinquishment, and people who maybe didn't treat you the best way growing up, maybe people you grieved that you never got to meet. And then there's this question of, as Sharon put in here about forgiveness. Have you found any really deep emotional things you had to confront as a result of the practice?
Yes, definitely. And mainly, I think in the beginning, because I was sort of, getting all the photographs that I had of my biological side of the family and my adopted side, and kind of, printing them all out and then like laying them on a table and sort of looking at them all and kind of having these little like mind conversations with each one. And there were certain people that I was almost like I had no words for that person. And I think that, that just showed me, just like where I'm at with everybody. So I thought that was a very important piece of it. But I think that when I go to the altar, there is a sense of universality that I bring to it. And it's more from a place of healing than a place of feeling victimized. Because just even the act of making an altar and being that intentional is already sort of flipping into a place of empowerment, and also, in really claiming your own narrative.
It is very interesting to see the number of people here who have thought about this in different ways. And it's encouraging also. And it's not something, again, that I had heard out there really very much. And I've, of course, been intrigued by what you've been talking about and the way it's been helping you in your life, serving you in your life. And again, you haven't claimed to have um, great metaphysical insights or something like this, or claiming that you know certain esoteric things, and that's never been the point of this. It's not to be mysterious and far-fetched or anything. This is there's a tangible part of this, and it is, again, I keep thinking about this unifying part, because that word intersection that you use for yourself, the coming together, the culmination in a lot of ways of so many things in this great web of connectedness. There's one thing you said when we were having lunch over this discussion, and I'm trying to think how you worded it, but it had to do with the fact that we if we think about our ancestors and the people upon whose shoulders we stand, it's easy kind of to polarize them into like, these were good people, these were bad people, and then I was relinquished by bad people or this, and
Right.
and you've said these people came out of stories too, and it's important not to isolate a single moment or dimension of their lives when you think about them.
Right. And that doesn't deny anything about
Right.
them or about your experience of them or your relationship to them. Um, because, if you have lived through difficult relationships with your family members, then that's always sort of in the picture. But the altar work is I don't know, it brings me into like more of a meditative place. I
Okay.
always find that I do a little ritual. Basically, I have a little bell that I ring,
Wow.
which I think I bought it in some shop in New York, and it was like a Buddhist shop. And I know that they use that in other cultures, to sort of let the ancestors know you're there and you're going to make an offering. And so I have this little series of things that I do. I don't do it every day. But I also find it that it takes something to actually do it. It isn't simple. It's actually, it reminds me of when I first started meditating, and how much effort it took to sit down and actually do it. It's kind of like that. So that's what makes me feel like it's like a real practice,
There is a
because it isn't.
discipline, yeah.
It takes discipline. It takes a lot of conscious intention to do this work. Yeah.
That's a big word, right? Intentionality. And this emphasizes again the spiritual practice side of that we do hear in so many traditions of spiritual practices, disciplines, and observations. Offering all of that goes along well with a lot of what we hear in different spiritual traditions around the world and in religious practices in a pluralistic society, and they are doing this. And so when you've talked to people, first of all, do you talk to people regularly about this practice? Do you talk to adoptees about it, or are there people that have seen the altar, for example, and asked you questions about it being in your home?
Um, Not that many. I do, well, when we have our Adoptees Connect dinners, I've shared some things about it there. And that's about it. I have been speaking about it with other friends too. And just because I don't think it's just a practice for adoptees. I think it could be very helpful for just about anybody who is interested in seeing what it's about. Um, and I also want to make sure everyone understands that this isn't in place of other types of healing that are needed for people. I'm not talking about using altar as a form of spiritually bypassing any other types of forms of healing that are needed and important.
Important point. Yeah. Thank you for making that point. I think that's definitely something that needs to be taken into consideration. It's not an end run around
Right.
work that has to be done, basically, and other ways that that's found. But it sounds like it supplements your life in tremendous ways and provides a real depth and a real meaning there that it's very intriguing, and I don't mean that in a disinterested way, like often I mean, again, I'm thinking so much about what how would I bring bring them to with me, bring them together, bring them in the same room, um, and who are they even? So you've kind of figured out who some of them are, and we saw the questions in the chat about are these my adoptive parents and my adoptive family? Is this my biological family? And you've said they're all there, and even my friends are there, and people who've had parts of me in formative ways are there. And so it just brings the imagination so strongly into play here, which is another form of spiritual practice here, is the religious imagination and the way you envision things about what might be and what might be beyond. So I'm sure that questions of that sort, that this would be a way to explore things like that in this way. And I know you and I have had conversations about spirituality because it's a needful thing in the type of society and type of issues that we're facing now. It's something that I think is vital and missing. So wow, I really feel like the entire conversation is again unique. I'm excited to see other people are exploring something like it. I don't know if you knew they were out there, or
Yeah.
um, I wonder if you could talk about any resources or places people can go or turn. Obviously, we want them to read anything you've written about this, but is there anything out there that people should know that they can look for?
I mean, I just, I don't know if I could point to any particular things. I've seen a couple documentaries. Obviously, Indigenous people have these,
Yeah,
um, have a relationship with their ancestry and others. I'm not trying to emulate other cultures, but I am trying to find my own way. And I really think that's important with this, is to find your own way with it. But again, I love Stephen Jenkinson's work. There's probably many I can't think of right now. Um, but yeah, I would just love to hear what other people are experiencing, if they're doing work like this or have anything to share.
yeah, this is I think probably a good point to go away in a second here to the Q&A, but I wanted to ask you one final question, which is
Okay.
about you mentioned owning your real narrative. I think you used language similar to that. In what ways do you think altar work and ancestry work has helped you own your story more?
Oh, I think it's the only time I've ever really owned my story is when I started to really have the courage to do this kind of work. I mean, I've lived in under this sort of umbrella of, having an adopted mother who lived very a long time and unable to have this kind of conversation with her. Um, and also, just having my immediate family really not having any kind of um, deep understanding about any of this. So when that isn't there, I think you have to create a space for your own narrative, and that's what this has given me. Yeah.
Jill, I want to thank you for a conversation that I know that we will continue to have, and um, looking forward in a minute here to hearing what other people's thoughts are on the practice and how this has been meaningful for some of them as well in terms of things they're already doing. And I wanted to thank you for being our guest here on the Adoption Happy Hour.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks for holding such a beautiful space.
Really appreciate that. So at this point, we will conclude the Zoom recording, and this again will be found on the YouTube channel for the National Association of Adoptees and Parents. We'll turn to a Q&A, and